Coming up on Bridge City News, drive-through was the format for this year's Rotary Rib Fest. Guests at the Soup Kitchen enjoyed their first ever brunch. And Nicholas Sharon Pool is set to reopen Monday, September 21st.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Thank you for joining us. The Rotary Rib Fest had its last day at the NMAX Center parking lot. Over the course of the weekend, the drive-through event had 160 volunteers to ensure things flowed smoothly.
Last year was our first Rotary Rib Fest. We did that at Henderson Lake where you could walk up, and this year we want to make sure that everybody's comfortable. We follow all the guidelines for social distancing, so we turned it into a drive-through. So you just stay in the comfort of your own vehicle. We have many volunteers that all around. They'll hand you a menu. You have time to pick your line, go through, and then you have the opportunity to come park and eat safely in your own vehicle, or you can just take your ribs and go home.
So we're doing drive-through Rib Fest. This is the second year this group of guys has come to work with Rotary. It's been a great success. I think we've seen almost 3,500 cars in the first 2 days, so we're super excited about it, and it's going to be a great partnership for the future.
It's long days, long hard days of making sure that there's enough food for Lethbridge to enjoy. I mean, we're here early as 6 a.m. and as late as midnight, you know, just getting everything ready for you guys.
Yeah, I even slept in my truck this week actually to cook ribs for Lethbridge, so it was busy.
Well, I think it's awesome that they could still have it. It's unfortunate we can't all sit out at the picnic tables and enjoy it, but just driving up here and smelling it makes you want it.
The Lethbridge Soup Kitchen held its first ever Sunday brunch. The brunch was hosted by the Lethbridge and District Labour Council and was well received by guests.
This is the first time that we would come out to the brunch. We, as a Labour Council, have committed to do one brunch a month, so this is the first one, and we're happy to be here. This morning we served fruit salad, breakfast sandwich, there was some coffee, some pastries.
When we started back in 1984, we had one meal, and we kept doing that for 33 years, and since then we added breakfast, which really is something people needed, and we kept looking at the Sunday. We have not done anything Sunday except the evening meal, which has also been a huge success. A lot of people have come, but we wanted to do something other than just sort of handing out a few little goodies in the morning, so we decided we should try to do a brunch. And so what happened with that is the Labour Council stepped up and said, could we take the third Sunday of every month, and that happens to be today. So we were very thankful that they came. It's a trial, it really is. I really hope that we can do this every month. I think it's not fair to our guests if you have one Sunday off, one Sunday on, that kind of stuff. It's really difficult to let them know. But we had 63 guests today, greatly appreciated by all. They were excited. Of course, when you ask them, should we do this again, there's an immediate answer, absolutely. So right now, I guess I'm putting the word out that if there's other organizations such as the Labour Council, or maybe a small business or a restaurant or a family group that would like to take one Sunday a month, it's pretty straightforward. You arrive at 9 to help with prep and serve at 10:30 till 11:30-ish, clean up and go home and feel good about what you've done. So we're really excited that we've started this off. We hope we can keep it going.
It's time to unpack your swimsuits because the Nicholas Sharon Pool in Lethbridge is geared to reopen Monday, September 21st. Change rooms will be open for swimmers, albeit with social distance guidelines, and masks will need to be worn inside until you're in the pool. The hot tubs and saunas will be open to the public as well with limited capacity. Staff are asking swimmers to shower before they go into the pool, but not afterwards.
We're going to have the same programs that we virtually had pre-COVID. The difference that you're going to see is the COVID precautions that we have in place to mitigate risk. And lessons will be happening beginning September 28th. The difference with lessons, we've reduced the capacities for lessons as well as our other swims. And the young levels, preschool through to Swim Kids 4, actually have parents that have to participate as instructors have to socially distance.
Yeah, I mean, we're excited from a city standpoint to be able to open more facilities for the public. I know it's been difficult for the citizens and and the users not having these opportunities to get out and participate. So we are very excited to be able to move closer to getting all of our facilities back open again.
As for Fritz Sick Pool, the city plans on reopening it in late October. Most towns can only dream of operating net zero electrically, and that's now a reality for the town of Raymond. As MICAH QUINN explains, they were just announced as one of 9 municipalities around Canada to win an award for the 2020 Sustainable Community Awards for their work in energy.
Becoming a net zero electrical town is a real possibility, and for the town of Raymond, that meant being recognized for a 2020 Sustainable Communities Award for their work in the energy field.
Well, this is a big win for the town of Raymond. It's not something that we planned on doing. We're trying to save and help our residents with their tax-paying money. So to win an award in trying to do this is a great accomplishment for us.
The net zero electrical project cost $2.8 million to complete.
$650,000 of which we were able to get from a grant from the Municipal Climate Change Action Center, and then we decided to lease the rest of the purchase price for this system over the 15 years, and that qualified us for a 15-year warranty from bumper to bumper, as they say, for the system itself.
There is a huge environmental positive to the project.
One of the nice aspects about this project is that over the 25-year minimum life expectancy for the system, we'll actually be able to reduce about just over 20,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions from the environment.
Pratt says there is an opportunity for other municipalities to follow in the footsteps of Raymond.
I think what I would say to other communities is that there are many options that they could consider. When we started going down this path, the intent was never to be the first net zero community in Canada for our municipal operations. That's just kind of what it turned into.
The town of Raymond will give a presentation on the electrical net zero project at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities virtual conference that will take place on October 20th to 22nd. For Bridge City News, I'm MICAH QUINN.
A surge of suicides have plagued Medicine Hat. The city and many groups within it are looking for answers as to why so many men are taking their lives. As video journalist Naveen Day explains, community groups are stepping up to get answers and to make change happen.
The city of Medicine Hat is one of the few places on Earth where the pandemic is not the main issue of discussion. In May, a talented crane operator took his own life. Shortly after, there was another suicide among the same group of friends. And then another. In a city that has had only one death to COVID-19, but multiple suicides, the community, city council, and mayor are looking for answers.
The number one question in Medicine Hat right now is why. From families to the wives that are left behind to just general residents of Medicine Hat, why. And then when you don't know the answer, then that's when the conspiracy theories start. That there's a suicide pact or that they were all linked together and there's something in their past I'm trying to dispel that.
One community support group called the Inner Man Project looks to shed light on men's mental illness and mental health. Founders Dylan and Melissa Eckes say they are working to end the stigma surrounding men's mental health.
We want to point out that it is okay to be a tough, robust man. It is okay to be strong-willed, but it's also good to be vulnerable, and it's good to talk about your emotions and your feelings.
There's a lot of ways this affects women as well, on how do we approach the men in our lives about their mental health? How do we as women talk to our partners, our dads, our friends, our brothers, about how they're feeling, with making them feel okay, that it's okay to communicate with us.
For now, the city of Medicine Hat is still grappling with what has been lost. So many young men now gone. For Bridge City News, I'm Naveen Day.
Recapping one of our top news stories, the Lethbridge Soup Kitchen held its first ever Sunday brunch. The brunch was hosted by the Lethbridge and District Labor Council and was well received by guests. And a look at weekend weather. The rain this weekend has given us a break from the smoke this week. Sunday night, expect just a few clouds in the sky along with a low of 10. And for Monday, we start the week with sunshine and a high of 22. After the break, BCN's Hal Roberts speaks to Colette Akima, a Lethbridge woman with a powerful story about how prayer and counseling helped her overcome her pornography addiction and find her true sexual identity. That interview is coming up next.
The storms of life can at times take a real toll on our mental and emotional health. Today we're chatting with a woman who has an amazing story of healing and how God helped her after she was viciously gang raped about 10 years ago. Her name is Colette Akima, Associate Speaker with Faith Beyond Belief, an organization whose mission it is to help Christians become effective in sharing Christ in everyday conversations. Colette, welcome to BCN.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just honored to be here, so thank you.
Oh, it's our pleasure having you on board. Colette, describe first of all for our viewers who you were before you were being raped.
I was just a regular, well, maybe, I think we have to go really far back. I think that the issue of sexuality was put on my heart when I was younger. I was abused when I was a child. And I also think so as much as that was also for evil, I also think that just ignited in me a awareness of sexuality and the fact that there's this there's something that we as Christians often don't talk about. And I grew up in a believing family, an amazing, loving home. I was raised Christian, and I know what I believe, and I know the God who loves me. And that was, but it was always kind of a bit of there was an undercurrent of this in my life. I was dealing with compulsive masturbation, and then of course I was raped when I was in high school, in junior high. So it was really, it changed everything. And yet at the same time, this was something that was already, there was something there. There was a part of me that wanted to have this conversation. There was a part of me that had been ignited in this. And, all of, just like everything, I only learned from all these things. And now I'm able to just talk about what happened and realize that, God's grace is more.
Let's describe what actually led to that fateful day when you were raped.
It was just a regular day. I was just a young girl. And it's hard to talk about the specifics of that day, Hal. But it was a place where I should have been safe, and I was with people where I should have been safe. And I was not being kept safe that day. And it was just terrible realizing that I could be in a safe community and be, I think I grew up knowing that, knowing the scriptures, knowing that we all have gone astray. We all like sheep have gone astray, and there's no one who does good, not even one. And yet you believe that people just won't do certain things, right? And then I had to learn that even Christians themselves will do depraved things. And that was very, very difficult because it completely shattered my spirituality and my faith in my community. And yet, God was able to keep me safe at that time afterward. So.
Those people who attacked you, were they ever captured and charged?
No, they were not.
Wow. Is it still an open investigation, or is it a cold case with the police?
It's a cold case with the police because it ended up being a historic investigation because I was unable to come forward with my testimony and with my experience until just a few years ago. And by then, too much time had already passed. And when the perpetrators were, in being investigated, they denied, they refused to have lie detector tests, and then refused basically all communication. And then the investigation went dead from there.
Let me ask you something, Colette. It's been about 10 years now. Have you been able to forgive those who did this horrifying thing to you?
Yes, I have. I have been able to forgive them. And my body and my mind do not forget. And even my heart does not forget. But my life is full of brokenness as well. And like I said, we are all equal under God. We've all sinned equally. And so, yes, I have forgiven them.
Colette, how did this really affect your relationships with men and women?
I think it just kind of blew up what was already an issue for me. So I was already, just like any regular girl, I was going through the end of puberty, and so just like any other any other girl, I was jittery around boys. I became aroused at awkward times. I wondered if I was gay because I there were girls that I really loved. I wondered if I was bi. I wondered if maybe I was actually a boy. And so all these things were on my mind. But uh, the rape, and then the especially what's really important for people to understand is that because of what happened, the trauma, I also became addicted to pornography. And it wasn't just, people tend to say, well, girls, it's different for girls. Girls are not addicted to hardcore pornography. Well, yeah, they are. When we Google something, we find the exact same thing as men. We find the exact same thing as children and as seniors, right? So we need to realize that the internet's not discretionary that way. And as much as people say that women are not visually wired, we also are visually stimulated, some women more than others, and we're not all the same. And so for me, pornography became a real problem. I really struggled with pornography addiction and sexual addiction because of what happened, which, which, which led to all kinds of problems, right? I mean, because of the porn addiction, what happened was it's something we call a hypersexualized outlook on life. So what that means is that I just saw sexuality everywhere. I would just be walking down the road and I would see people crossing the street toward me, and immediately when my mind would go, I bet they're going to go have sex. Completely out of context. And I wasn't raised that way. It's important to understand that that's not how I was. I didn't think anybody else experienced life that way. So I felt very, very outside. I felt very alone.
So let's talk about how God really helped, first of all, with your healing after being attacked and raped, and secondly, through this porn addiction.
Right. Well, what's really amazing is that I think the one thing that we have to remember is that human sexuality is inconsistent, and human sexuality is subject to change and subject to trauma and subject to brain chemistry and genetics and all these things. But Christian sexuality and moral sexuality is not dependent on those things. And so for me, what became huge was realizing that I was able to see the trauma, I was able to see my addiction, I was able to see the fallout, all the consequences. I was able to see that through the lens of a Christian worldview. And because of that, God reminded me that there are constants, that there are realities, that no matter what happens to my body, no matter what happens in my life, no matter what emotions I have or thoughts I have, these are things that do not change. Objective truths about me, about other people, about the life that God has given me, those are things that do not change. And that completely changed everything, because then it was no longer dependent on how I felt and on how I perceived things to be. I could read the scriptures and trust that reality is what it is, regardless of how I feel.
Now, you spoke earlier about maybe some sexual confusion. You thought maybe you were bi at one point in time. Did you receive counseling to help you seek out your true identity when it comes to your sexuality?
Yes, I did. So after my husband and I got married, we actually, of course, which is really inevitable when there's sexual trauma and sexual addiction, we started having some problems. And so I went to counseling, and he went to counseling. And it was really, what was also amazing was that I was at the university at the time. I was taking a university course on sex addiction. And as I was taking this course, I went into it just thinking, wow, this is fascinating. This is really cool. And then because I enjoyed that, I thought it was interesting to talk about what makes sex addiction and what makes other sexuality normal or healthy, right? So we talked about that and we had those discussions. And then as time went on and as I was going through counseling, I realized, wait a minute, it makes sense that I am understanding this language because this is a problem that I have. And I didn't even realize it until then. And so there was a real moment for me, if you don't mind my sharing. I share it not to be graphic, but I share it because I want people to understand how horrible this moment can be. But I know many people who have come to this moment, and that there's hope for you. There's healing. There can be that turnaround. because there's a beautiful plan of sexuality that we can follow. And so what happened for me was that I was just using pornography like any other day, and what I was watching turned out to be one girl with several men. And as I was watching, I could see that she was trying to push one of them away and starting to say no. And as I was watching, I realized there is something wrong with me. There is something wrong. I need help. And that was really the moment that just God just changed everything. I picked up the phone, I called a trusted friend, and I said, I need to tell you something. And that's what changed everything.
You know, Colette, you really hit the nail on the head there. I've spoken to other people who are addicted to drugs, alcohol, sex, and they say you have to hit your rock bottom and realize that you need help. You can't have other people say to you, you have a problem, you know, pointing fingers at you. The walls go up, right? People become defensive, say, I don't have a problem, I'm fine, you know? So you have to reach that rock bottom before you finally realize that, yes, I finally need help. And it's amazing that you did that. Outside of the counseling, and you reached out to your friend, and of course you're praying to our Heavenly Father, what else really helped you overcome the addiction?
What really helped me overcome the addiction was the support group that I was able to start. So there was a contact that I had in Lethbridge, a man who had already set up a Christian support group for men who were dealing with sex addiction and porn addiction. And so when I got into contact with him, I asked him, is there one for women? And he said, well, no, but you should start one. So I started one, and I sat alone in a room waiting for people to join me for a year. It didn't really take off. And then suddenly somebody contacted me and said, you know, you need to come and speak to this group of young women. And when we started talking, we were all like, oh, me too. You know, I can't believe you're saying the words that I have always felt. You know, we were sharing stories where we were just speaking each other's language, and it was just unreal. And so we started a support group where we were just praying for each other and helping each other to live out our sexuality the way that we believe we should, based on our worldview. And so that's what was really, you know, what I think has been so hard for me in being in Lethbridge in the last few months, is knowing that our city, along with so many other cities, have banned the kind of counseling that I went through. And because it was, you know, unfortunately, we think that the type of counseling that comes to, you know, where we talk about sexuality and issues of gender, we think that we have to make sure that we protect LGBTQ people, and we should. And that's why we need to be really careful that we define things, because I've had the therapy that has now been banned, but I have specifically asked for it because it helped me reduce my unwanted sexual attractions and unwanted sexual behavior. And because of that, it is now defined as being illegal. And that's something we need to speak up more. Women like me, people like me, we need to speak up and say, this is counseling that I went to. It was not torture. It was a good thing. And I need to be free to choose the counseling that I went to, because just because something illegal is done to me, does that mean that it should be illegal for me to seek help?
Colette, what advice do you have for those who may be going through confusing times like you experienced, especially when it comes to sex and gender?
I think what's really important for us to understand is that we've been getting one dimension of an idea about sexuality. And so I've been doing some research into some of the sex education that we get in our community of Lethbridge when it comes to these topics, some of the organizations that provide sex education. And this is where we learned about sexuality. Unfortunately, the sex education that we receive and that youth receive is unfortunately it's not holistic in the fact that it doesn't include spiritual aspects. And so what happens is that people like myself, our sexuality gets conflicted with other things, and we don't know where to go. And we need to know that there are other options. And so it's really important, especially that the Christian community, that the church community step up and say, there's a Christian worldview, Christian view of sexuality that offers you hope and healing. And it goes far beyond any kind of fleeting sexual identity.
You talked about some of the therapy that's available now for women. You know, it's been around for men for a very long time, especially the programs. How about today? Are there still great support programs for women today addicted to porn?
I would say, I think if a woman reached out to me now compared to 5 years ago, I think it's possible that there might be a few more resources, a few more books. But to be honest, Hal, it has not taken off as it should. You know, men are getting the help that they need, but there's no the support group for women in Lethbridge is no longer running because there was nobody else who was able to step up and take over. There's not many groups of them, even across Canada, even in the United States. They're there, but you really have to look for them. And in our community, especially in our small community, people feel like there's no help. And that's why I'm so eager to tell people that there is help. And organizations like Faith Beyond Belief really can show you that there's more. There really is hope.
I was thinking maybe, yeah, you should take the lead and take the charge, and you're doing that already with Faith Beyond Belief. Colette Ikema, Associate Speaker with Faith Beyond Belief, thanks so much for your powerful story today and for joining me.
Thank you.
The environment has made many worldwide headlines. Joining me now to discuss the issue is Dr. Kelvin Beisner, National Spokesperson for the Cornwall Alliance, a group made up of natural scientists, economists, and theologians. Dr. Beisner, welcome to the show. We are so happy to have you on today.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be on the program with you.
All right, and I should have mentioned to you, you're joining us from Memphis, Tennessee, correct?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Now, since this is right up your alley, why don't you tell us, in your opinion, what makes a true environmentalist?
Well, I think a true environmentalist is simply somebody who thinks, I want to make my life the kind of life that leaves the earth a better place than when I entered it. We put it this way, that as Christians involved in this, we take very seriously the instruction from God to human beings in Genesis 1:28. We are supposed to be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, and have dominion over it, or rule it. But we don't want that ruling, that dominion, to be abusive, to be exploitative. Rather, we want it to reflect the way that God rules his creation. And what we see in the earlier verses of Genesis 1 is that God makes everything out of nothing. He brings light out of darkness, order out of chaos, life out of non-life, great variety of life. He instructs all the different forms of life to be fruitful and highly fecund. This is the kind of thing that we should be doing ourselves. So we describe this godly sort of dominion as men and women created in God's image, working together to enhance the fruitfulness and the beauty and the safety of the earth, to the glory of God and to the benefit of our neighbors.
Now, you have written a book called Creation Stewardship, Evaluating Competing Views, in which you mention in that book that it's dangerous to put people or celebrities on a pedestal, such as someone like Greta Thunberg. So why do you say that?
Well, frankly, we need to actually know a lot about what it is we talk about when we pretend to give other people advice. And too often, celebrities, whether it be someone as young as Greta Thunberg, who began speaking out on these things at age 16, or Hollywood celebrities, many of them really, frankly, have never learned in great depth about these issues. I've been studying these issues since the mid-1980s, so it's 35 years in this, and even so, there are parts of this where I would not seek to speak out as an expert. I realize the limits of my own knowledge. So what we need to do is to go to people who really have true expertise on these things. That's why I put together the Cornwall Alliance the way we did. We have just under 70 scholars in our network. About a third are natural scientists, including some of the world's top climate scientists. About a third are economists and policy wonks, and about a third are theologians and philosophers. So we try to bring all of those different insights together to address highly complex problems. And if we don't bring the different disciplinary backgrounds together, we're likely to have rather narrow, superficial approaches to solving very difficult problems.
Mm-hmm. Now, you wrote an interesting piece on your blog with the headline, Global Average Temperature Plummets, Tropical Temperature Fall, third biggest on record. Were you trying to make a point there?
The point is not that proves that global warming isn't real. No, it doesn't prove any such thing. The point instead is that what we get in the climate debates is that the advocates of the notion of catastrophic anthropogenic global warming, man-made global warming that is catastrophic, will point to every heat wave, every temporary uptick in temperature as evidence that global warming is not only real, but is potentially catastrophic, that it is overwhelmingly man-made, things of that sort. But they won't do the same with downticks in temperature. And so I'm just simply pointing out an inconsistency. If that brief downturn in global average temperature about 2 years ago was not evidence against, then a brief upturn is not evidence for. What we need to be doing is looking at very long-term data and looking for real trends rather than anomalies in the trends. And the long-term data do show us that, well, the Earth's average surface atmospheric temperature has risen by roughly 1 degree Celsius since about the middle of the 19th century. And I think that human emissions of carbon dioxide have contributed to that, but the notion that it's catastrophic, the notion that it is overwhelmingly human, man-made, those notions I think are not well established in the actual evidence.
Okay, so we need to be careful not to fall into misleading information, basically, is what you're saying, whether it comes to social media or headlines. So how can the average viewer know what headline to trust?
Well, the self-serving answer for me would be to say, come to cornwallalliance.org, cornwallalliance.org. But, really, the Apostle Paul tells us in 1 Thessalonians 5:21, test all things, hold fast what is good. So this is why when we post things on the Cornwall Alliance's website, we make sure that we have links to sources of outstanding scholarly work so that people are able to check the figures for themselves, check the data. That's part of what we're supposed to do as Christians. And that's really the heart of what it is to be scientific. The Nobel Prize-winning physicist Richard Feynman said that the key to science is that when we have a hypothesis, a guess as to how something works in nature, we set up experiments to see whether what would happen if our guess were right really does happen. And if the observations that come from the experiment, whether in the laboratory or out in the real world, if the observations contradict the prediction, then our guess, our hypothesis, even our theory is wrong. And it doesn't matter how smart we are or how beautiful our guess was or anything else. If observation contradicts theory, then the theory is wrong. And we have to go back to the drawing board. And that's what we get essentially in terms of the claims of very rapid, potentially catastrophic global warming. Those claims are all based not on empirical observations, but on computer models of how the atmosphere responds to added CO2. And the models, on average, predict 2 to 3 times as much warming as actually observed over the relevant period. That means the models are wrong, and they really need correction.
Well, so you mentioned CO2, and we were talking about headlines. So headlines tell us that CO2 emissions from fossil fuels is the main cause of global warming. But you disagree with this claim, right?
Well, I think it's actually theoretically possible that that's true. What I think is that the best empirical evidence indicates that it's probably not true. Notice I said probably. I think in many, many different scientific things, we're quite mistaken to speak with total confidence and assurance. I would be wrong to say, well, it's a settled matter that CO2 from fossil fuels is not the primary cause of warming. I also think it's wrong to say, well, the science is settled. CO2 is the primary cause from burning fossil fuels. Here's why I say what I do. It's precisely because the computer models of global climate predict 2 to 3 times as much warming as actually has been observed in response to the added CO2 in the atmosphere, that we know, therefore, that the models are wrong, that they are over-predicting the amount of influence that CO2 has on global average temperature. When we look back through the history of global temperatures, we see that there have been very similar periods of warming in the past, such as the Minoan warm period, the Roman warm period, the medieval warm period. We've also seen cooling periods in the past, and the interesting thing is that although there is a correlation between temperature and CO2 content in the atmosphere, the correlation is the opposite of what you would think it would be if CO2 were the control knob for temperature. That is, temperature changes first, CO2 changes later. And the reason for that is that as the ocean warms, it outgasses CO2. Ocean water contains CO2. The warmer it is, the less CO2 it keeps in mixture. The colder it is, the more CO2 it holds. So as the temperature changes first, the CO2 follows.
Wow, you are very much a scientist, I could tell. Now, I don't know how it is in the US. I know that our federal government here, and you're probably aware of this, but our federal government here is requiring that all provinces put a carbon tax into place. Do you think that this will produce any positive results?
No, I think it will not produce positive results. And the fundamental reason is this, that a carbon tax assumes that adding carbon dioxide, and by the way, it's very deceptive to speak of it as a carbon tax, because carbon is an element, and in its solid form, it's a black, nasty dust, and it can be a problem, okay? Carbon dioxide is not carbon. It is carbon plus 2 atoms of oxygen. It's an odorless, colorless gas that is non-toxic at concentrations 20 times what they are in our present atmosphere. And it is absolutely essential to life. Plants need it for photosynthesis. And the more of it there is, the better plants grow. So treating carbon dioxide as a pollutant is actually, I think, quite the opposite of what it really is. The more CO2 there is in the air, the better plants grow, and that means there's more food for everything that eats plants or eats something else that does eat plants. So the result is a huge increase in crop yields around the world. This has been studied in literally thousands of peer-reviewed studies showing that we have seen an increase in crop yields measured in terms of about $3.2 trillion of extra food from 1960 to 2012, and we can expect about another $9.8 trillion worth of food just because we've added CO2 to the atmosphere from 2012 to 2050. So you don't tax something that you want more of. You reward it instead. So no, a carbon tax would not be a good idea.
Oh, wow. Now, Dr. Beisner, you believe that the current global response to climate change actually could have some implications, especially for the poor, right?
I do. And that's simply because everything that we produce, we do it using energy. It takes energy to grow food, to process food, to transport food, to make clothing, to make shelter, to have communication. We're using energy right now in this Skype call. It takes vast amounts of energy to lift and keep whole societies out of poverty. Now, the less expensive energy is, the more of it people can use. And in fact, historically, it has been access to abundant, affordable energy, primarily through fossil fuels, coal, petroleum, and natural gas, that has lifted and kept whole societies out of poverty. If we're going to fight allegedly catastrophic, allegedly overwhelmingly man-made global warming by pushing fossil fuels out of our energy mix, we're going to do two things. One, we're going to raise the cost of energy because the fossil fuels are the cheapest source aside from nuclear and hydro. They're much cheaper than wind and solar when you count everything into the price. But two, we're also going to make that energy less reliable. The wind isn't always blowing, the sun isn't always shining. And because of that, you don't have a steady input of energy into the electric grid. That means you have an unstable grid. The more unstable it is, the more you're going to have brownouts and blackouts, and those things kill.
Now, a lot of Western nations are phasing out coal. How much of a problem is coal to the environment?
Well, if you burn coal in a really sloppy way, coal burning can be a very big problem to the environment. But in all developed countries, we have adopted ways of burning coal to generate electricity that are extremely clean. And essentially, the only thing that comes out of the misnamed smokestacks of coal-fired generating plants in developed countries is water vapor. It's just simply steam from the turbines and the cooling towers. Nothing else comes out. So coal can be badly used, and sometimes it is in very poor countries. And yet the interesting thing that happens, and we see this through the history of our environments and of our economies as well, is that even while air pollution rises in the early stages of economic development, as countries begin to use coal and can't yet afford the very, very highly efficient ways of using it, even while the air pollution rises, life expectancy rises too. And what that means is that the benefits of all of the economic development, driven in part by the use of coal, outweigh the risks. And then as people get wealthy enough, they can afford to adopt the cleaner technologies of using coal, and then you get rid of the pollution, and at the same time you have the benefits of that economic development.
Dr. Beisner, we're out of time, but thank you so much. We really appreciate you joining us and sharing your expertise with us.
Well, thank you very much, and your listeners can learn more at cornwallalliance.org.
Most of us grew up hearing all about revival, or we attended church gatherings that were referred to as revival meetings. But do we really know what revival really is? What would it take to get another revival going? Joining me now to talk about it is Dr. James Chong. He's the Vice President of Strategy and Innovation for InterVarsity Christian Fellowship USA, also co-author of the book Longing for Revival. James, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Now, first of all, tell me a little bit more about your book and what really motivated you to write it.
Yeah, I think we're at a time where, well, we wanted to see a move of God, but I think we felt that when we're looking around, that our strategies, our marketing, the ways that our tactics, all the things that we're trying to do with our own effort, that we've come to the end of that basically it's going to deliver all that it's going to deliver. And I think we've come to the end of that. And we wanted something where that could feel more like a move of God rather than just the result of our efforts and what we're trying to do. We want to see God move in that way again. But, when it comes to that kind of thing, with the move of God, we wanted to see revival. That word is a loaded word for a lot of folks. It is for me. Some people get really excited about that word, but others, it comes with a lot of baggage. So we wanted to write a book that was revival for the rest of us, a revival that basically that could be more encompassing of more parts of the Christian faith, those communities that might not be talking about it, something that could be more accessible so that people could long for it, experience it, and lead it if it were to come.
So how would you really define the term revival?
Yeah, in the book, we define revival as a season of breakthroughs in word, deed, and power that usher in a new normal of kingdom experience and fruitfulness. And each line is very, very important to us. But it's this idea that it's not just an event. It's not just a one-time thing that happens. But as these breakthroughs happen in a particular season, it actually creates a different level of expectancy for us that's balanced in word, deed, and power, and that's experienced by us and around us.
Now, there are different levels of revival, correct? Personal, community, regional, even global?
Yeah, that's right.
Tell me more about those.
Oh, yeah. Both my co-author, Ryan Pfeiffer, and I, we live in Southern California, and so we have earthquakes. It happens quite often here, and If you've been around, there's just different kinds of earthquakes. There's ones that slam down. There are others that roll gently for a while. And the different earthquakes also, the strength of them are measured by what we know as the Richter scale. Oh, well, with earthquakes, a 1.0 on the Richter scale won't wake you from your sleep, but a 9.0 could level cities. And so, but what's fascinating about that is that all of that is considered an earthquake, whether it's a 1.0 or 9.0. And so, in the same way, we wanted to talk about revival in the same way that there are different levels of it, and we wanted to include a personal aspect to it as well as something that can extend out to global. So we have personal, communal, regional, national, and global. And the reason for that is, because there's different debates around revival, whether can you talk about personal things in terms of revival? Does it always have to be a mass movement? And when we were looking at the history of revivals, we have felt that there has been no revival that has happened without revived people. And so we needed something that would capture what happens in the heart. With the John Wesley at Aldersgate or others where there's something that happens to one or a group of people that's personal. And without that, it doesn't tend to grow and fan into something larger. And so we wanted something that would capture all of that.
Are there some specific cities around the world where we're seeing a genuine revival take place?
That's a great question. And that the genuine, again, we have to talk about the different definitions, whether it's a personal or a global. And the personal ones are happening all around the world all the time. But the ones that come to mind immediately is what we're hearing about what's happening in Iran. And with believers there, as people of Muslim background are meeting Jesus or Isa in their dreams. And there's been this amazing growth in the underground church in Iran. I would guess that would be something that would be close to a revival. Last summer, I was in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia and really enjoying and learning from the student movement there. They're a student movement of 50,000 students, and they're just growing in amazing ways. And they seem to have a balance of word, deed, and power in their midst. They're on every single campus in their country. They're doing incredible work. There's ways that God is moving powerfully through them. So those are two that come to mind immediately. But I would imagine, just like there are earthquakes all around the world at different levels, that there are places where personally there are people that God is reaching, and that these are the seeds of revival happening all around the world.
So James, when you look at the North American church overall, are we in need of a revival right now?
I'm thinking so. We have seen the fruit of the narratives, both on the left and the right, and seeing where that's led us. And you do get a sense that in the current time, it's easy to despair. It's easy to see that our efforts aren't getting us the results that we're looking for. I think we're ripe for a time for renewal or revival. And it does seem like there are a lot of people around that are talking about that and seeking that, as we've really, frankly, come to the end of the rope of our own efforts. And we really want to see God move in a new way again.
So what is really needed to get a revival going in the North American churches? It may be bringing over some missionaries from countries in Africa who are really on fire for God?
Yeah, hey, that's not a bad idea. We did bring the general secretary of the Ethiopian movement to our staff gathering, which was about 1,700 people, and it was fantastic to learn from him. But revivals are a move of God. We can't make those happen. They do not happen under our own effort, but we can prepare for them. We can experience them if they're going to come. We can lead if they came in our time. So I think there are ways that we could do that. And our book, we talk about the 4 C's to help prepare us to consecrate ourselves, to seek a calling in revival, to contend for revival, and then also to pay attention to our character in revival, because that's very, very important as well. So there are ways that we can prepare, but it is God. God will do revival. He will move. He will make revival happen. We're just preparing ourselves so that we don't miss it if it were to come.
How important are holiness and repentance when it comes to revival?
Oh, absolutely important. I think we are in need of a people who are set apart, a bit of a remnant, that we've become so much like the culture around us that how do we stand out? How do people know that we actually have the Spirit of God residing in us? And so to be set apart, to be holy, to come back to places where we feel different, that we're people of integrity, that we're seeking Jesus in a different way. I think there's much more need for that now, and really for us to come to the truth of that, which is confession, and for us to repent of that, to be able to turn around and to follow Jesus in a new way, so that we're doing the things that Jesus did for the reasons that he did them. We are in need of a non-tactical, non-strategic, much more spiritual way of connecting with God again, so that we can prepare for revival.
Earnest prayer obviously is also very important when it comes to revival. But James, how important is the Holy Spirit and church unity to revival?
Oh, also very important. In our definition of revival, we talked about word, deed, and power, and that we do need intimacy and experience of the Holy Spirit, as well as letting the Spirit do things that we can't rationally explain all the time in ways that he can move in power. But also, yes, unity of the church is a key, one of those key factors that in times of revival, the community comes together around mission, around his Spirit, that there tends to be places where we lay down our differences and seek to come more and more together in times of renewal and revival. So church unity is extremely important.
What do you see as some of the roadblocks when it comes to revival, really prevent revival from happening?
That is legion. There are many things that we could do. The sin in our hearts, the sin in our communities. There are ways that we just block the flow of what God is doing, and so then God will move to a community or to a region that's open to what he wants to do. So there's ways that we can block it. There's ways that we just do not seek him in prayer. We think that we could do it on our own effort. I just think there are many, many, many reasons. And for some of us, we just don't want to dare to hope again. We've been disappointed by God. There are ways that he hasn't met our expectations, however that's worked out. And so we don't seek him the way that we could. I just think there are lots of reasons and lots of ways that we could pull ourselves out of the flow of revival. Can we block what God is doing? I don't think so. But can we miss it? Can it do something beside us or go around us? I think revival, we can miss revival. I think that's the bigger issue.
It seems that when a revival does take place, however, it only lasts for a short period of time. Any thoughts on what it would take to make it last long term?
It doesn't happen in history where these things last forever. I think it's a Western bias to want the 5 or the 10% consistent return that goes on and on and on. But throughout history, there's an ebb and flow to revival. The book of Judges gives us a sense of that ebb and flow in the Old Testament. And you see it even in the writings of Paul. There were no churches that were perfect, just looking through the letters. And so there is this constant ebb and flow. That doesn't actually invalidate that. That's just how God moves. And in the times of flow, this is where a lot of the renewal and movement and the advance of God's kingdom in very visceral ways that happens. But then there are times of retreat. There are times when it goes back. And so I think rather than seeking something really consistent, because that doesn't seem to be the way it works, is we're open to how God moves. We take it in as it comes, and then we keep trusting God when it doesn't. We just know that, though, those times of revival, when they do happen, they have greater impacts than what happens in the moment. Like the times or the bounds that we usually put around revival, that people who've lived through those times still make really important decisions in those times. And structures, ministries get created, communities get formed, people make decisions to follow Jesus differently in those times that still have reverberating impacts throughout history. So even if we don't see them in a revival-like communal kind of way, they still have huge importance. And so much so that historian Mark Shaw would say that the global resurgence of Christianity in the 20th century, he would say strategically, it has happened through revival.
What else can we really learn from past revivals? Was there a certain common denominator?
That's the word. We have just seen that no revivals have happened without revived people. And it almost seems too obvious to say. Obviously, in revivals, people are also revived. But it just goes back to the prayer in Psalm 85, where the psalmist asks for God to revive them again. And it's in that same vein that we see people of God who come together, they seek God earnestly, they try to obey the things that they hear in prayer. There's something about that where there's a hunger for God, there's a holy discontent with the way things are, and they together seek God for more, and they wait upon Him. People tend to seek renewal, and in that way, God tends to answer.
What do you really want readers to take away from your book, Longing for Revival, James?
Yeah, that I think rather than be fatalistic about what God will do, can we prepare ourselves to be more and more open to whatever God wants to do in our lives? And so our hope in the book is, would we even be open enough, dare say even hope, that God could move again in a powerful way in our lifetimes? And we won't know. We don't know the times or the places of how God will do these things, but would we be willing to prepare ourselves, to consecrate ourselves, so that if it were to come, we're ready and we're ready to jump in?
James Chong, Vice President of Strategy and Innovation for InterVarsity Christian Fellowship USA and co-author of the book, Longing for Revival. Thanks so much for your time today.
And thanks for having me.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.